You know, I've always wondered how the Earthbound, or Mother fandom, has always managed to stick together despite the very small releases in the West. I get that many dead franchises often have somewhat of a community, F-Zero off the top of my head, but usually these communities are very small and only relevant from the few extra oddities and references from other franchises. The same should honestly be said for Earthbound, or Mother, but if you look at sites like Twitter and the subreddit, you'll notice that Earthbound has quite the following, a lot bigger than most dead or concluded franchises, and especially a franchise that has little support for the West, by the West. Well, that's what I thought at first, until I did a little amount of research, and after realizing how much the West gets, well, at least whatever they can get, I soon noticed that even to this day, Nintendo still gives Earthbound somewhat of a relevancy in the West. And that brings me to this question: what is the future for the Earthbound fandom, or at least for Earthbound overall? Okay, before giving context, for one, this isn't about if Earthbound will get a future game. More so, it's about if Earthbound will continue having relevancy, which is associated heavily with its fandom. Second, the fandom that I'm referring to is the Western one for Earthbound, which is why I'll be referring to these games as Earthbound barring a few official titles here and there, and also because they're the main subject of this video. Also, I would like to state that this is not an Earthbound review. That'll come when the time needs it, aka when I feel like replaying the game. Now back to where I was getting at. I would like to separate this into 4 different eras because I like categorizing stuff into stupid names, and also it plays out well for the script. So we start off in the niche era, the era where Earthbound released until the beginning of YouTube. So most of the 90s and early 2000s. This is where Earthbound is very unfamiliar to most Nintendo fans, and essentially non-existent to most of the world. You get the gist of it, Earthbound comes out, it flops, and falls out of relevancy immediately. But not forever, as later on the West would receive teasers of Mother 64 at Nintendo promotional events. Earthbound would also contain some relevance when Ness became a mainstay character for the hit series Super Smash Bros., becoming known by even the most casual of Nintendo fans, but still not holding much of an eye for Nintendo of America or the West. For whatever amount of Earthbound fans that existed during this time period, they were eating well. We soon enter the popularization era, which may sound weird, but from the mid-2000s until the 2010s, many could associate the increasing popularity of Earthbound during this time with YouTube reviews and Let's Plays, along with various forums involving Earthbound and the Mother series being formed. And although Earthbound would grow even more in popularity onwards, the popularity growth of this era is likely the reason why Earthbound kept getting more popular and even acknowledged by Nintendo years later. Despite this, there was more for the Earthbound fandom. Though Nintendo would only release Mother 3 in Japan, die-hard Western fans would actually get to play this, though unofficially, with the Mother 3 English translation patch. Finally, Western fans could play the newest game in the series with, from what I've seen, very little threats of copyright authority or takedowns. And based on some few sources, Nintendo couldn't care much either. They had no means of releasing it in the West, so as long as they were abiding by copyright and piracy laws, they probably didn't give a rat's ass about the patch. Not only that, but Mother 3's main protagonist, Lucas, would also get his shine in the Western light with his addition in the Super Smash Bros. Series, starting from Brawl and becoming a mainstay from there on. There was also an Earthbound animated series released around the time, though nobody really talks about it, so... The most recent era, starting from around 2010s until around 2020 or 2021, we have the Renaissance era. Though it may seem like it should be associated with 2013, it really should be associated with the year of 2011, when Satoru Iwata began the Iwata Asks series, where he asked various game developers, artists, and designers about games they have worked on and putting more stories or information on a few subjects from their works. One of these interviews involved Shigesato Itoi, which was published to the West and explained some things about the future of Earthbound, stating that although the series was pretty much concluded after the 3rd game, there would still be more options in the future, and thus a few years later came the re-release of Earthbound for the Nintendo Wii U, nearly 20 years after its release in the West. The sole reason for this was from the growing fan community in the West that were looking forward to a re-release that this even occurred, at least according to Iwata himself. This is why I feel like this era fits well as a Renaissance era, not in the sense of its glory, but in the sense that much like the Italians discovering the early works of Greece and Rome, Nintendo fans had grown awareness of the Earthbound series, which, much like the Renaissance era, would be completed by fantastic works associated from that time and one celebrated by the wealthy. Or, at least in this case, die-hard Nintendo fans. Despite this, Earthbound became a hit for a Wii U release and was one of the top-selling virtual console games for the system. This onslaught of support would later give release to Earthbound Beginnings, the first game in the series with an official English translation on the Nintendo Wii U 2 years later. After these hailed releases, Nintendo would periodically release Earthbound Beginnings and Earthbound on almost every releasing console and mini-console from there on, with most recently both games being available for Nintendo Switch Online. This is essentially, for now, the peak for the Earthbound series in the West, and once again for the fandom, they had a lot on their plates to eat. Now we're here today, and despite not having a new game since 2006, Earthbound still holds relevancy these days than games like Chibi Robo, a franchise with more games than the Mother series and releases as recent as... Okay, well, still more recent than anything completely new from Mother and Earthbound, really. So now, at this point, what's next? Well, there's two ways I can see this happening. A somewhat continuation of the Renaissance era, but even more available to the casual eye. Somewhat like the post-Renaissance era, where the works become more and more available, which we're already seeing with the release of the games on Nintendo Switch Online, which technically gives Earthbound Beginnings and Earthbound a much larger sale point than any other time in history given how much Switch owners have online. But that's assuming that all or even many online users play the game. From here on, we'll just see repeated re-releases of Earthbound Beginnings and Earthbound for future consoles, and that would be it for the West. Not much to go from there. Or, we could possibly enter a sort of Enlightenment era, where more liberal decisions are produced for the Earthbound series. Now, I ain't saying that we are getting a Mother 3 Western release anytime soon, but I'm kind of hinting at something like that. If you don't know, the Nintendo Switch has had a lot of hardware and regional changes compared to earlier Nintendo consoles. Region lock has been entirely removed, and although that may sound awesome for other region game cartridges, it also applies to the eShop and online, which includes the bonus game libraries available with the online. And with recent leaks involving a possible Game Boy Advance library for the Switch, what I'm trying to get here is that it may be likely that soon enough, Western and even international Switch owners may be able to play Mother 3, a Japanese-only Mother 3, but still Mother 3 nonetheless. It may not be the most straightforward way for most fans or even official to some because of the fact that there is no translation version available, but this is completely legal and allowed on the Switch. Hell, if Nintendo or Nintendo of America themselves become very liberal in their decisions, we might even get an HD remaster or remake of Earthbound.
Like that's ever gonna happen.
But that's simply a man's wet dream. Another thing I want to note is that very recently, Mother has been seeing a release of merchandise in Japan, and with Nintendo having international toy manufacturers for their products and IPs like Jakks Pacific, Sanai, and Little Buddy toys, we might, just might, see Earthbound toys and products released in the West, which actually sounds a lot more reasonable given the recent popularity boom. But then again, these are all hypothetical. Who knows, maybe they'll grow extra conservative and disallow any sort of way to play Mother 3 if the GBA leaks are true. Well, I think they've been proven to be true already, so more so if a Mother 3 re-release is true. They might even just get tired of re-releasing Earthbound and just stop with it. Then again, that's a very extreme scenario. But again, Nintendo hasn't always been known for their promises and legacy roles. Regardless, the Earthbound fandom is eating well and may continue to do so in the future as long as something Earthbound related keeps coming to the West. Keep it going, Earthbounders.